God, Mum, you're not on Tinder.
Most people call it plenty of fuck.
We're going to make you a profile.
The Playing with Matches podcast, where women talk about their experiences dating online. Hello, and welcome to Playing with Matches episode 4. I'm Mark, and for those of you who don't know, along with our producer Joanna and my mum Denise, I interviewed around 40 women, mostly during the second UK lockdown, about their experiences of online dating. We've heard some funny stories so far, and a few horrible ones, and we've heard a lot about dick pics, the unsolicited kind. I'm not sure how you go about soliciting a dick pic. I guess maybe you just ask. Unless it's a member of parliament, they might be a bit wary at the moment. But I digress. Today we meet Sarah. Sarah is very candid and funny. We learn about the importance of being polite when you have a sexual kink. And we hear about the potential consequences of going on a date or a holiday with someone before you know their political persuasion. And therefore the benefits of doing a bit of research on somebody before you meet them. Sarah's friend can do it for you with just a first name and a phone number. It's a lot of fun this episode, I think, and some serious points too. The interview took place over Zoom. Sarah was using an earphone mic combo. I mentioned that because there's the odd tap and knock, but nothing too distracting. And the overall audio quality is pretty good for an internet call. I'll be back as always at the end with a bit of closing waffle and details of how you can get in touch with the show. Until then, take it away, Sarah.
I'm 30 years old and I actually moved here with an ex-partner. So we were together for over 3 years. So it's my longest term relationship. And while we were together, that's sort of when internet dating really developed. You know, when my friends were getting Tinder, and I just remember being like, oh, can I ever go on Tinder? Almost like it was a bit of a game. You know, it was just so instantaneous rather than the old school creating a profile, someone weird potentially messaging you. So I just always remember when we broke up, I was almost a bit excited to get out there, you know, going from 22 to 26, being in a relationship, and then suddenly being single was a totally different landscape to when I was last single. So I was quite excited and I'm that sort of personality where I will throw myself into something, you know, I don't do things by halves. So when I started internet dating, it was like a date, maybe 2 or 3 dates every week. And yeah, that was 4 years ago. And I've had a few things on and off, few relationships here and there, but nothing really that serious. I did the classic drink and swipe that you shouldn't do. So I remember actually with one guy, and the first message I sent him was drink ? And now internet dating for a while, that's very forward and people don't really do that. So I ended up just meeting this guy out of the blue for a drink. I was really nervous and I'd never really done it before. And you could just tell he was quite seasoned. He was very calm and collected, and he started giving me feedback during the date. So at one point, you know, I'm quite expressive and I was doing all of this with my hands, and he was like, what are you doing? And I was like, oh, we're gesticulating, just using my hands. And he was like, can you just not do that? I can tell you're new to this and you don't really date a lot. But and he started, because I was still living with my ex, he was like, you shouldn't say that on a date. Like, full stop, you should not say that. I was sitting there thinking, this is awful. Like, this is the bad date that people talk about. And then at the end, he kind of went to kiss me and I moved, and it just ended up him putting his nose straight into my eyeball. And it was just really painful. So I was like, okay, bye. Yeah, nice to meet you. And the next day at work, I just had this massive red bloodshot eye from the whole experience. For me, it was an awful day. And then when you get the message afterwards being like, really great to meet you, let's do this again. It's just, I find it so interesting dynamic of how you can be on the same date but have two very different experiences of how it went. So yeah, that was my first date after being in a long-term relationship. I suppose for me, I have a thing about, I would hate to be described as boring. So if I meet people that may be a little bit, I don't want to use the word alternative, but maybe a bit eccentric, have certain quirks, their personality, I really like that. And also, I almost feel like I'm my own personal journalist on dates. Like if it's getting a bit weird and a bit interesting, or there'll be this part of their personality that seems a bit unhinged. I want to almost pry it open and really explore it. And it's quite bad because, yeah, I end up sometimes getting myself into situations I shouldn't do. But there was this one guy who was a writer. He was like creative, you know, someone's good at expressing themselves. Fantastic. We met in London, had some nice drinks, too many drinks, went on a few dates, you know, it was all very sexual. And maybe like third or fourth date, I went to his. I'd actually tried to call it off before then because there was a few things that he'd said or ways that he'd come across that made me a bit uncomfortable. He was a bit aggressive. I think he was very opinionated, but in a slightly aggressive, narrow-minded way. So I tried to call it off. He won me back, ended up going to his place, and he told me that he'd studied military history and that he was quite into it, shall we say. And I got into his flat and I just looked around and I was just greeted with all of these swastikas, Hitler posters, Hitler books. So I had his autobiography there. And I was like, okay, the guy's into military history, you know, that's quite evident. Everyone's got their period, I guess. And then I looked and there were the pins on the side. So like badges, like with swastikas on there. I was like, okay, this has gone a step too far. It's not really remembering an era. It's more like almost a token of really believing in something. So I said to him, oh, do you wear these? He's like, well, no, not every day. And I was like, okay, right. Okay, so there's a Nazi thing going on here. And then looking around again, there was all this taxidermy everywhere, which just added to just the creepiness of it all. And I was sitting there really taking it in, thinking, what the hell do I do now? Like, I'm here. I'm not in my hometown. Definitely the last train's gone. And I'm in this flat guy that I wasn't too sure on. And now this is definitely, it's like the final nail in the coffin. And then as I was sitting there, I just noticed something come out the corner of my eye. And I turned around really quickly, as you would if you just kind of see something you're unsure of. And I was a bit freaked out anyway. And as I did that, my nose started bleeding. So there was a small cut just along my nose here. And I immediately was like, ow, what the hell's going on? And I turned around and he was holding this small taxidermy piranha. And he'd come at the side of my face. And as I turned around, I'd cut my nose on its teeth. And I was just like, what the fuck are you doing? Like, what the hell is this? And he was like, you weren't meant to turn around so quickly. And he was, again, that's a very much a victim blaming kind of situation of, it was my fault for turning around too quickly rather than him brandishing a taxidermy piranha at me. So, yeah. My friend, she is a sort of person where she'll need to add someone on Facebook, follow them on Instagram, have a phone conversation with them before she even meets them in real life. And I've been screwed over in the past. I'm sure everyone has, where you turn up on a date and they don't look like their photos, or they're overweight or have less hair. So she was very adamant to me. She's like, Sarah, before you go on a date, she's like, please just let me do your research. Like, please, just give me, all I need is their first name and their phone number, and I will find out everything that there is to know. And I was like, oh, she's the sort of person where she'll go, oh, doesn't he look like that TV presenter that got put away for molesting kids? And then you can't unsee it. Like, she's one of those people that can draw these comparisons. So this one guy I was talking to, and I was going through a phase of give everything a go. Like, you know, might be look a bit Essex, fake tan, teeth, tattoos, not my thing, but maybe it could be my thing. Well, let's give it a go. So this guy who I knew already wasn't my typical type, he was very flashy and he was talking about how he only wore designer clothes and all this stuff. And I thought, okay, let's give it a go. You never know, you could have a great time, and just because they're different to you doesn't make them a bad person. So there was something about the way he was talking about buying all this stuff, and it was very showy. And I was asking what he did for work, and it was very vague about it. So I said to my friend, like, it's almost like a secret agent, I was like, can you look into this guy for me? So she researched and she's like, oh, it's really weird. What was it? Oh, that was it. He said he bought shares in a law firm, and we started looking into it, and I asked him what the name of the law firm was, and he told me, and we looked into it a little bit further, and we found out that he was due to be put in prison for money laundering, and him and his business partner were getting themselves written into old people's wills, and then when they died they would then profit from it. So they were essentially swindling old ladies and old gentlemen. So that was a lucky escape, and that was a lesson in doing your research beforehand, because I mean, part of me was like, oh, you know, you could go out and have a nice meal and have a few nice drinks, and if he wants to be flashy then that's fine. But I thought, imagine finding that out afterwards and knowing that you'd almost spent this money that was illegal and illegitimate, etc. So that was an interesting experiment into having to really research who you're going to meet before you agree to meet them. I had it recently where a guy was really keen to chat to me and meet up, and was sending me these voice clips, and he said he was this model. He'd moved over from Croatia, but then he grew up in Wales. Again, already sounds quite far-fetched. And he was this international model and looked gorgeous, but it turns out that he was a catfish the entire time, and just had to Google his mobile number, and these forums and threads came up of don't trust this guy, it's not him, he's this. And then people had actually found the model of the guy that he was impersonating. But again, with me, I kind of really continued this facade, because I then pretended to the guy that I was a catfish. So I was saying to him, how do you feel if I didn't look like my photos? I feel like I haven't been totally honest with you. And he was like, what do you mean? So I did this whole thing pretending that I was a totally different person to who I made out to be, and that Sarah was my cousin, and that, you know, I've always struggled with my self-esteem. Like, I really wanted to get this guy to confess to me and almost find out what really was going on, because I was saying to my friends, I feel quite sorry for him, actually. You know, he must be struggling to a point where he feels like he needs to be someone else. Like, there's something going on there. He would not open up. He would not tell me who he really was. And all of these forums and threads said, as soon as you out him for his true identity, he'll just block you and he'll disappear off the face of the planet. So I've still got him to this day. I don't know who he really is, and I'm desperate to find out. But I contacted the guy he was impersonating and told him all about it, because, you know, if someone's taking your identity, I feel like you have the right to know. So me and the actual model guy had a short conversation, which was weird but nice. So yeah, I think the sexual etiquette is quite interesting. There was a guy, me and him were having sex, and he then asked me if my mum had nice tits whilst we were having sex, and I told him, well, I wouldn't really know because my mum's dead. And that killed the mood, and we stopped having sex. And then I have found that foot fetishes are more common than I would have thought. I don't understand it. It's not a fetish of mine. I just thought that, you know, maybe looking, touching, maybe a bit of toe sucking during sex, I can understand that. This guy specifically wanted to smell the soles of my feet during sex. That was what got him off. That was nothing else to do with feet apart from smelling. Usually when you're getting to know someone, it's like, you a boobs or bum guy, you know, the kind of basic questions come out. And he was like, well, neither, I'm feet. And I was like, oh, again, being quite curious and thinking, where does that come from? What is it about them? When did you first realize? All these questions that I like to ask. And then it developed that he liked smelling them. I am the sort of person that if someone else is into it, I will naturally be into it, you know. And there is a thing about your repulsion barrier being lowered when you're aroused. That was the thing I was reading about recently. So I think there's, the saying anything goes, it kind of is more likely, if someone is into it and really into it, you kind of, I don't know, maybe it's like a sexual empathy, I'm not sure. So I was taking antidepressants for the first time in my life during the first lockdown. And one of the side effects I was quite looking forward to was the fact that it killed your sex drive. And I was like, yes, time to think about something else other than sex. This is great. Bring it on. So I took them for a while. And then when I stopped taking them, it was like suddenly a massive surge, like everything I'd been missing out on for months all just hit me at once. So I got back on the dating apps and met this guy. And again, it was weird because you're socially distancing, so you're dating, but you can't get too close. Then that almost makes it more intense and you want it more. So me and this guy did break lockdown, sorry, and came around here. We had sex, and just before we were about to have sex, he's like, oh, I really like these knickers. I was like, oh, thank you, great. Then afterwards I was in a different room and he was getting dressed or whatever, and he's like, oh, can I take these with me as a little souvenir? And I was like, yeah, sure, why not? And then I grossly didn't clean up properly until the next day. I came into my living room and I was picking up my clothes and I was like, knickers aren't here. Wonder if he actually did take them. I looked at my phone and he had been sending me messages analysing the contents of my knickers that he'd taken from my flat. And yeah, it interests me as well how some men don't understand female biology, and second of all, it's all about them. So there was discharge in my pants because that is what the vagina does. It's a self-cleaning machine. And he was like, oh, you really were excited, weren't you, on our date? You really were. And I was like, oh, I didn't have the heart to say, like, that wasn't really anything you were doing. That was just there due to biology. Nothing sexy at all going on. And yeah, so we had these knickers. I was kind of I just find things like that really funny. I'm impossible to shock. And then I went out and I met my friends for a drink on the beach, and he messaged me the following day going, oh, you weren't in yesterday, were you? Where were you? I thought, that's odd. And yeah, he'd turned up at my door. I just moved into this place, and because the doorbell, the entry system wasn't really working, if my doorbell rang, I would just buzz whoever it was, because 9 times out of 10 it would be a delivery, or 1 times out of 10 a potential murderer. So I was just so glad that I wasn't in that day and that I'd gone out, because he was at my doorstep. I thought, all right, if I buzzed him, like, what did you want? Like, there was no conversation about coming over or seeing each other again. So that was a bit sinister, and I did get him to return my underpants to me, so they are now, I still wear them. I should really throw those away. It's really hard to distinguish, I think, between a kink and potential murderer, because I think when anyone's got a slight kink that's a bit off the wall, you're like, oh, that's a bit different. But is that an insight into something that's quite unhinged about their personality, or is it just a kink? I don't know. In my experience, people that all have a bit of a kink will have the personality issues. That probably sounds really judgmental. I'm only speaking from my own experience. There was a lot of gaslighting involved on his part, where like the indignance of he didn't act in any way that was strange. He couldn't really understand why I didn't want to see him again. There is that conversation that you have when someone's quite interested, that you start to almost, I don't know if that's just me, it might be a fault of mine, where you start to almost doubt yourself and you think, am I overreacting? I'm the opposite of controlled and measured. So people are like, take things slow, don't message back too soon. I'm just like enthusiastic, and I'm like, I like you, you like me, let's just go for it. Let's not fuck around playing games. So me and this guy booked a holiday to Italy within about a month knowing each other, and everyone's like, oh my God, that's so crazy. But I just I quite like that, and people expect it of me now, so I've kind of got a reputation to uphold. So yeah, we went to Italy. Again, not knowing much of this guy. When you first start dating, you kind of go out and you'll have a bottle of wine each and tell them your deepest, darkest secrets, but some of it doesn't go in because you're already really drunk. But there's also parts that you should bring up a lot sooner. So that's why Hinge is quite good, actually, because it will have your political views, and your whether you take drugs or whether you have kids or whether you're open to kids. I think it's quite nice, especially if you're on the fence about someone, like, it sounds a bit boring, they're not that physically attractive, conservative, no, next. So that's quite good. So I wish I had met this guy on Hinge. So we were on a train in Italy and the train broke down. It was boiling hot, even hotter in the train. We had, one of those tiny little water bottles between us. First hour passed, we're like, oh, this is a nuisance. We were there for about 4 hours in the end. And it's quite interesting to see how someone responds to that kind of situation. Like, he was getting all, very prickly and kept looking at our bags. And if anyone was getting too close to the bags, he would go and shuffle them around to stake his claim on the bag and all this kind of stuff. And he was getting quite upset. So I remember thinking, trying to pacify him. And I was like, oh, have you played this new game, or have you looked at this? And then in the end, the conversation moved on to politics. And I said, oh, have you ever done vote for policies? He's like, no, what's that? I was like, oh, they ask you a series of questions based on things that you're interested in, and it spits out an answer at the end of who you should vote for based on your own intrinsic beliefs. So he was doing that, and then I was bored, so I was kind of peeking over his shoulder, and I was like, oh, you don't think people should be able to wear a burqa? Okay. And then in the end, it, spits out the answer, and he came out as UKIP, being quite liberal and vegan. There was just this deathly silence, and he just looked at me and went, "This is it, isn't it? This is a deal breaker." And I was like, "Yep, pretty much, yep." And then, of course, that opened up the whole can of worms, and we started talking. He was saying there are places in the UK you go to where no one even speaks English, and I was like, okay, what's the name of this place? Bradford. Okay, have you ever been to Bradford? No. Right, where are you getting this information from? It was just crazy. So that was an interesting expose into someone's political beliefs and why you should probably not go on holiday with someone that you've only known for a few weeks. I don't think you can categorize dating sites as being a good or bad place, just like you can't categorize people as being good or bad. It's pretty much a platform of people to try and put their best selves forward. So I think you need to be aware of people maybe trying to put themselves in their best light, but again, there's so much onus put on women to be safe or to stay safe or make sure you meet someone, and all of these things that you put on yourself. I mean, there's a thing of one of my guy friends, he insists on paying for everything on a date, and I was like, oh, that's a bit chauvinistic, blah, blah, blah. And he's like, no, I call it dick tax. I was like, what do you mean? He's like, I feel like I should be taxed for having a dick. He's like, for example, going on a date, I'm worried I might not have a good time, bit boring, might not be a spark. The girl's worrying, am I going to assault her? There's so much more fear in a woman's mind when meeting a male for the first time. He was like, I feel like it's the least I can do. I get there's probably more you should probably go down the lines of reassuring someone, or it doesn't need to necessarily be about money. But I thought it was an interesting way of looking at it. I think men need to be aware of their own privilege and how entering that situation is a very different landscape than if you're a woman, essentially. So I think it can be a safe space, but I don't think it's necessarily the dating app's essentially the vehicle for human behavior, and people have got the choice to be a good or a bad person or dismissive, or it's hard to strike the balance between showing someone attention, showing someone too much attention. And there's a real dance that you have to play with your own emotions and not being too open and getting hurt, or knowing that someone can just stop responding tomorrow, and there's no onus on that person. They don't owe you anything to stay in touch or to make you feel a certain way. I think it takes down a lot of social barriers of, you know, if you see someone in the street, you don't know if they're married, their sexual orientation, anything like that. At least you know that they're single and they're ready to date, and you're all in one place. I think it's made me more wary, maybe a bit more emotionally disconnected, and to probably be a bit more ruthless. And I've probably gone the other way, whereas if I notice a glimmer of aggression or anything like that, it's an immediate shutdown. No, it's a non-negotiable for me. I mean, even if someone seems a bit dismissive or not particularly enthusiastic. I had that last Saturday. A guy was sort of being a bit like, yeah, we can meet for coffee if you want. Yeah, sure, whatever you want. Yeah, whatever time works. Like, kind of being a bit non-committal. And you do that thing where you give people the benefit of the doubt, and then you meet up and lo and behold, they're exactly as you imagined. Yeah, so trusting my own intuition, I think, a lot of the time. There's little social cues, even if someone, the way in which they'll say, rather than, yeah, let's meet up, it's if you want, you know, someone that's almost 1 foot in, 1 foot out. If you were going to look at both ends of the spectrum, would you rather have someone that's a little bit kinky, or someone that, you know, you feel like they've died halfway through sex, like there's no response whatsoever? So kinky's fine. I think it's the passivity is one thing that I'll pick up on, or I can't stand people. And I do think, you know, COVID and a lot of things going on around you, there is part of you that will probably retreat slightly and not be as connected or as dynamic as you usually would. So but I do pick up on those passive cues, because I don't know, I'm just quite an expressive person. I feel like I need someone to match my energy.
So that was Sarah, wonderfully honest and some funny/dodgy stories there. Interesting idea that a man paying for everything on a date might just be paying his dick tax. I definitely thought that story was going somewhere else. But the point that meeting a stranger is potentially a more dangerous situation for women than it is for men is perhaps something that men should bear in mind on a first date. It put me in mind of the quote, I think it's Margaret Atwood, that said, men are afraid that women will laugh at them, women are afraid that men will kill them. But some great stories from Sarah, and some things to learn, I think. Not least that the vagina is a self-cleaning machine. So that's it, I think. Thank you so much to Sarah for being so honest and entertaining. If you'd like to get in touch with us, then we would love to hear from you. You can email us at playingwithmatchespodcast@gmail.com. So until next week, good luck out there and on there. Bye-bye.